At dawn in Prato, white steam is already rising from a dye workshop. Workers push firewood into the furnace. Two dye vats built into the floor slowly begin to heat. Long lengths of woolen cloth are lifted with wooden poles and lowered into the scalding liquid. When the pale fabric is pulled out again, it may have become deep red, dark green, purple brown, or a shade approaching black. To someone standing outside, this appears to be an extraordinarily profitable business. A cloth merchant delivers undyed fabric. The dyer adds plants, minerals, and hot water. Several days later, an ordinary white cloth has become colored woolens that can be sold at a much higher price. The richer the color, the more valuable the finished product. The more orders the workshop receives, the busier the vats become. And the busier the vats become, the more cash the workshop should possess. But a set of dye house accounts from the end of the 14th century reveals exactly the opposite. The vats could remain in constant use. The warehouse could be filled with customers' cloth. The value of completed work recorded in the ledger could continue rising. And yet the operator's cash box could become increasingly empty. The reason was simple. When an order entered the workshop, money did not usually enter with it. What arrived was an obligation. The workshop had to advance the cost of dyes, fuel, and labor immediately, even though the customer might not settle the account until much later. In December of 1395, a master dyer from Prato named Niccolò di Piero di Giunta del Rosso entered into a partnership with the merchant Francesco di Marco d'Attini. Niccolò was not an inexperienced craftsman who had only recently learned how to mix colors. A letter from 1382 already described him as an excellent dyer capable of working with woad and many other colors. Another letter from 1367 mentioned the purchase of dye vats for his workshop, suggesting that he may already have been working in the trade for more than 20 years before the partnership was formally established. His customers did not come only from Prato. Cloth merchants producing high-quality woolens in Florence also sent fabric to his workshop. One contemporary even claimed that Niccolò dyed cloth for most of Florence's wool merchants. That statement may have been exaggerated, but it still shows that this was not a tiny workshop hidden in an alley recoloring old garments for local neighbors. It had become part of the production chain supplying the luxury textile industry of Tuscany. The most revealing feature of the business, however, was not Niccolò's technical ability. It was the question of who provided the money. The partnership agreement was straightforward. d'Attini supplied all the capital. Niccolò supplied his skill, experience, and labor. In other words, the man who understood the secrets of dyeing did not independently finance the full cost of operating the business. The money came from the merchant who controlled a much larger trading network, could obtain dyes through Pisa and Florence, and could move funds between several commercial companies. The dyer possessed the technical knowledge. The merchant possessed the cash that allowed the technical knowledge to operate continuously. This arrangement already provides part of the answer to the question. Had dyeing required only one vat, some water, and a skilled craftsman, Niccolò would not have needed d'Attini. He needed a capital partner because dyeing did not begin after the customer paid. The workshop had to purchase expensive materials first and then wait for payment. We can now enter the workshop itself. It stood in Prato's Porta Tiesi district, where the modern street still preserves a name associated with the dyer's trade. The working property consisted of two groups of buildings. One served as the dyeing company's warehouse and production area. The other was used for washing and purifying woolen cloth and included open ground around it. Near the front were masonry structures and wooden platforms mainly used for woad dyeing. Farther behind stood two large built-in vats used for higher quality colors. Niccolò personally owned this workshop and then rented it to the company that he had formed with d'Attini. He therefore occupied two different positions. As the owner of the property and equipment, he collected rent. As the technical partner, he shared in the earnings generated by the dyeing work. Even when the operating profit of the company was disappointing, the building itself could still produce income as long as the lease remained in place. The workshop employed only one permanent wage worker, a man named Marco di Giovanni. Another 5 assistants and 2 apprentices worked when needed, carrying cloth, washing it, stirring dye liquor, and performing other supporting tasks. This labor structure appears extremely economical. When orders were scarce, the company did not have to support a large permanent workforce. When business suddenly increased, additional workers could be called in. But from the perspective of cash flow, the problem remained. A temporary worker who had completed a day of labor usually expected food or payment. The firewood supplier expected settlement. The man who transported dye materials did not surrender his income merely because the cloth merchant had not yet paid the dye house. As orders increased, the workshop had to pay for more labor earlier. The customer's processing payment might still remain on the other side of the ledger, The most expensive elements were the materials inside the dye vats. By the end of the 14th century, Tuscan dyeing was broadly divided among different specializations. Lower-grade colors used relatively inexpensive ingredients. Woad workshops concentrated on blue. High-quality dye houses used madder, insect-based red dyes, and several mordants to produce reds, greens, purples, and complex dark colors. Niccolò and Dattini operated both woad facilities and high-quality dye vats. They were therefore working in the sections of the trade that demanded the most experience and the greatest amount of capital. Dyes could not simply be poured into water and expected to attach permanently to wool. Many colors required the fibers to be treated first with a mordant. The mordant helped bind the dye to the wool, making the color brighter and more resistant to washing and wear. The most important mordant in Niccolò's workshop was alum. Between December of 1395 and April of 1398, the company purchased approximately 2,582.5 pounds of alum. The total cost was 68 florins, 3 lire, and 5 soldi. The alum arrived in packages averaging roughly 250 pounds each. It came from other businesses within Dattini's commercial network, from wool cloth companies, and from a small number of local suppliers. During 37 high-quality dyeing operations, the workshop consumed approximately 2,569 pounds of alum. Materials entering the workshop were quickly transformed into production inventory, waiting to be used. The money spent on them did not remain in the cash box simply because the next customer order had not yet been completed. The alum supplier had already delivered the goods. The transport had already occurred. The packages were already inside the workshop. Whether the next cloth achieved the correct color on the first attempt or had to be dyed again, the capital had already been committed. The accounts also show that the company held approximately 300 pounds of unused alum in its own inventory at the end of the period. From an accounting perspective, this was an asset. From a cash perspective, it was money that had already left the cash box but had not yet been converted back into income through dyeing services. The more material the workshop stored, the better prepared it was to accept an urgent order. But the larger the inventory became, the less cash remained available for other payments. Some cloth merchants supplied the alum required for their own orders. At first, this appears to have been merely a technical arrangement, perhaps reflecting a customer's preference for a particular material. Commercially, it had a more direct meaning. A customer who supplied his own alum financed part of the production himself. The workshop did not need to advance the material cost. It also avoided carrying that cost while waiting for the customer to settle the processing account. When a dyer asked the customer to provide the materials, he was not discussing color alone. He was also deciding who would provide the money first. Alum was only the first layer of cost. High-quality red was produced mainly with madder. After the roots were dried, crushed, and prepared, madder could create shades ranging from brick red to brighter reds. It could also be combined with other colors to produce purple and dark tones. During the partnership's operating period, Niccolò and Dattini purchased approximately 1,852.5 pounds of madder. The recorded cost was 74 florins, 18 lire, 17 soldi, and 3 denarii. Actual consumption exceeded the amount purchased because the workshop also used inventory that had existed before the company was formed. Dyeing one lower-grade scarlet cloth could require approximately 25 pounds of medium-quality madder root. A large order therefore did not arrive as one white cloth accompanied by a future processing fee. It arrived as an immediate demand for dozens of pounds of expensive material. If 10 pieces of cloth entered the workshop together, the required madder might reach several hundred pounds. The dye entered the vat today. The processing fee might not enter the cash box today. The faster the volume of orders increased, the faster recorded revenue grew. But the dye inventory also disappeared more quickly. The operator had to purchase more madder immediately. Otherwise, the next customer could arrive to find the vats and workers ready, but no color available. In addition to alum and madder, the workshop required tartar, plant dyes, sumac, walnut husks, alder bark, iron filings, large quantities of clean water, and fuel. Tartar was the sediment formed inside wine barrels and could help alum fix color to wool. Yellow and green shades required several local plants. Brown, gray, and black could use bark and iron. Some of these materials were inexpensive by the pound, but hundreds or thousands of pounds passed through the workshop. Niccolò's accounts record more than 5,000 pounds of plant materials used for yellow and compound colors, along with several thousand pounds of walnut and alder products. Outside the workshop, a bundle of weeds or a sack of bark might appear almost worthless. Inside a continuously operating dye house, the large-scale consumption of cheap materials still produced substantial cash pressure. 1 pound might be inexpensive. 5,000 pounds were not. The vats also consumed more than dyeing materials. They consumed heat. High-quality dyeing commonly began with mordanting. Alum and tartar were dissolved in heated water and diluted with additional liquid. The woolen cloth was placed into the solution. The temperature was then gradually raised until it approached boiling and maintained for roughly an hour. Workers continuously moved the fabric gently with wooden poles. After mordanting, the cloth had to cool, lose excess liquid, and dry in a shaded area. Only then did the actual dyeing begin. The dye material was first boiled to extract its color and then filtered into another vat of hot water. The mordanted cloth entered the vat again. The temperature once more rose close to boiling. A cloth with a complicated color might go through 2 or more dyeing stages. Green was often created by dyeing the cloth blue first and then applying a yellow plant dye. Dark purple, brown, and black might also begin with blue before receiving madder, bark, plants, or iron. The more complex the color, the more times the workshop's capital passed through the vats. The first dyeing stage did not necessarily produce a finished commodity that could be delivered to the customer. It created a semi-finished product that required further work. The customer eventually saw a piece of dark green or purple cloth. The dye house saw 2 sets of materials, 2 heating cycles, 2 rounds of labor, and a longer period during which cash remained tied up. Even worse, the dyer could not fully determine the result before the cloth entered the vat. Wool reacted differently depending on the original fiber quality, earlier washing, moisture, dye concentration, and temperature. The same recipe did not always produce exactly the same shade. Medieval dyers had no instruments that continuously displayed precise temperatures. They judged heat through steam, the movement of the liquid, smell, touch, and years of experience. Once dyeing had begun, many errors could not easily be reversed. A slightly excessive temperature might alter the shade. Uneven mordanting could leave the cloth patchy. A weak dye bath might require the entire process to be repeated. A color that became too dark was difficult to remove. What did redyeing mean financially? The customer did not automatically agree to pay twice because the first attempt had failed. The workshop had to provide new dye materials. The furnace had to be lit again. Workers again lifted and turned the heavy wet cloth. The vat that could have been processing a new paying order remained occupied by a piece that had already been counted as completed work once. The workshop appeared busier than usual. But that portion of the activity did not create new revenue. It used new cost to repair an old order. The profitability of a dye house, therefore, could not be judged simply by whether smoke and steam were rising from its vats. One had to ask whether each heating cycle represented new billable work or the correction of a job whose income had already been recorded. The surviving accounts of Niccolò and Dattini document the high-quality dyeing completed between 1395 and 1398. The output included 88 pieces of lower-grade scarlet cloth, 31 green cloths, 25 dark cloths, and smaller quantities of yellow, golden yellow, quince-colored, and tawny fabric. The workshop also processed several cut pieces. Adding the listed charges in the account tables produces total processing revenue of approximately 1,457 lire. This was a substantial turnover. It shows that the workshop received a large volume of work and handled valuable colors. But turnover was not the same as profit available for distribution to the partners. Simply converting and adding the principal materials, whose totals are explicitly recorded, alum, madder, tartar, sumac, walnut, alder, and related supplies, produces a cost approaching 600 lire. That figure still does not fully include woad, other plants, firewood, transport, the permanent workers' wages, temporary assistance, equipment maintenance, or rent for the buildings. Broader research into Tuscan dyeing costs provides a useful proportional model. In a typical dyeing charge, dyes could account for approximately 45%. Mordants represented about 20%, washing cost around 2%. The remaining 33% was treated as the craftsman's general compensation. Even that 33% was not equivalent to modern net profit. Rent, fuel, permanent employees, equipment wear, bad debts, and the capital partner's cost of funds could still be deducted from it. When a customer paid 100 lire for dyeing, approximately 65 lire might immediately represent colorants and mordants. Another 2 lire went toward washing. Only 33 lire remained on paper for skill, labor, and operating risk. If the customer settled in cash on the same day, the workshop could recover that money quickly. But if the customer waited 1 month, 2 months, or longer, the workshop did not merely fail to receive the remaining 33 lire. It had already financed the earlier 65 lire of material costs on the customer's behalf. The dye house was therefore conducting another business that did not appear on its sign. It provided color. It also provided short-term production credit to cloth merchants. When a piece of fabric entered the workshop, ownership remained with the cloth merchant. The dyer could not freely sell the customer's cloth as his own property. But during production, the workshop's alum, madder, firewood, and labor had permanently entered that cloth. After delivery, the cloth merchant possessed a more valuable commodity. The dyer might possess only an account receivable waiting to be settled. The cloth merchant could send the finished fabric to Florence, Genoa, or a foreign market and wait for an ultimate buyer. The dye house had to purchase materials again before the next cloth could be processed. This was the most dangerous point in the cash chain. The cloth merchant could push payment pressure backward onto the dyer. The dyer could not always push the alum supplier's demands backward in the same way. Dettini's decision to provide all the capital now becomes easier to understand. He was not merely investing in a talented craftsman. He was using his large commercial network to fill the time gap between the dye house's expenses and its customer payments. His companies in Pisa and Florence could supply alum and madder. His wool cloth businesses could provide a steady flow of orders. Debts and credits could also be offset through the accounts of different companies. An independent dyer without this system might possess the same technical skill as Niccolò. He could still be forced to stop working because he could not purchase the next batch of materials. The workshop's problem was not necessarily a shortage of customers. It was a shortage of the money needed to continue working before those customers paid. The structure of Dettini's accounting records also shows why cash and recorded transactions had to be managed separately. His firms maintained accounts for debtors and creditors, merchandise, cash, expenses, and goods sent or received. The fact that a completed job had been recorded did not mean money had entered the cash chest. Only when the receivable was settled did recorded income become a resource that could purchase firewood, pay wages, and replenish dye stocks. We can now place this late 14th century dye house into 3 representative operating scenarios. These are not modern financial statements, reconstructed perfectly from every surviving entry. The records tell us about dyeing types, material quantities, and many charges. They do not organize every customer payment date, firewood expense, and hour of household labor into a modern cash flow statement. The following model uses average processing charges and historical cost proportions to show how orders could create financial pressure. Actual results would vary according to color, materials, payment arrangements, and the amount of rework. But the order of cash movement would remain broadly similar. In a strong year, the workshop processes 120 pieces of cloth. Using the historical charging tables, the average processing revenue is roughly 9 or 10 lire per piece. The workshop issues invoices totaling approximately 1,120 lire. Market conditions are favorable. Cloth merchants sell their finished products quickly. 9/10 of the dyeing accounts are settled within the operating period. The workshop receives approximately 1,000 lire in cash. Dyes, mordants, washing, and other variable costs consume around 750 lire. Rent, firewood, permanent employees, temporary assistance, and repairs consume another 150. Approximately 100 lire remain in the cash box. The ledger shows income. The cash box also contains money. This is a genuinely healthy, strong year. Orders keep the vats well utilized. Materials are purchased and soon consumed in production. Completed cloth is delivered and payment follows quickly. The same capital can finance several rounds of dyeing during the year. The workshop does not require an extraordinary profit margin. Rapid turnover allows it to accumulate a surplus. In an ordinary year, the workshop processes 100 pieces of cloth. It issues approximately 940 lire in processing accounts. From the perspective of the income ledger, the number of orders remains substantial. After materials, washing, rent, fuel, and workers, the workshop might still show a theoretical operating surplus of around 150 lire. The problem is that customers settle only 7/10 of the amounts owed. The cash box receives little more than 650 lire. The workshop may already have paid nearly 780 lire in cash costs. On paper, it is profitable. In cash, it is short by more than 100 lire. The remaining 280 lire have not disappeared. They are recorded under customers' names as accounts receivable. If every customer eventually pays, the workshop may still recover the money. But the matter required tomorrow cannot be purchased with a customer's name. The firewood supplier cannot throw future income written in a ledger into the furnace. The operator must borrow from the partner, delay payments to suppliers, reduce material inventory, or refuse the next group of orders. This is the moment when a workshop that appears commercially successful begins telling outsiders that it has no money. The weak year is even more counterintuitive. The workshop may be exceptionally busy. Cloth merchants in Florence fear changes in the market and send large quantities of semi-finished fabric for rapid completion. The dye house processes 140 pieces during the year and issues more than 1,300 lire in processing accounts. The vats rarely stop. Temporary workers continually enter and leave. The alum and madder stored in the warehouse disappear rapidly. But downstream cloth sales remain slow, and customers begin delaying payment. The workshop collects only around 6/10 of the fees, approximately 790 lire. Meanwhile, the volume of work has already consumed nearly 900 lire in dyes and mordants. Additional firewood, temporary labor, and maintenance require another 200. The cash deficit exceeds 300 lire. The ledger records the highest turnover of all 3 scenarios. The operator also faces the most serious cash pressure. If several expensive cloths fail and require red-eyeing, the shortage becomes larger. If an important customer never pays, an amount previously treated as an asset can become a direct loss. A weak year in a dye house does not necessarily appear as an empty workshop. It may look like constant fires, exhausted workers, crowded storage rooms, and an owner searching everywhere for enough money to purchase the next sack of alum. That is the condition under which a workshop genuinely becomes poorer as it becomes busier. Orders are not harmful by themselves. The problem arises when order volume grows faster than cash collection. Each new cloth requires the workshop to spend money first. Each completed order increases the amount customers owe. When receivables grow faster than the cash box, activity becomes a drain on working capital. A merchant with sufficient capital can use this situation to expand his position. He can purchase alum and matter in large quantities before prices rise. He can build inventory when materials are inexpensive. He can allow reliable customers to pay later. When one customer delays, he can still pay other workshops and suppliers. A small independent dyer has far less room. He may possess equally impressive technical skill, but he may have to require customers to supply their own materials or insist on payment immediately after every batch. Cloth merchants prefer workshops that can extend credit. Orders therefore flow increasingly toward operators with stronger capital. Skill determines whether one cloth can be dyed successfully. Capital determines whether the workshop can accept 100 cloths. The company formed by Niccolò and Dattini also demonstrates another solution to cash pressure. Idle equipment could be rented to someone else. Beginning in the spring of 1397, the company gradually reduced its own dyeing operations. Some equipment, small vats, and later the land used for woadwork were leased to other craftsmen. In February of 1399, the entire workshop was divided and rented to another woolcloth company. The partnership formally continued until 1400 and ended after Niccolò's death. The surviving material suggests that the workshop had previously achieved respectable results, but it does not fully explain why operations were gradually reduced. Its closure therefore cannot simply be described as a bankruptcy. The decision to rent out equipment is nevertheless commercially revealing. Operating the dye house directly required a continuous supply of working capital. Leasing the vats, property, and buildings to another operator converted uncertain processing income into more predictable rent. The tenant assumed the risk of purchasing dyes, collecting customer debts, and correcting production failures. The asset owner waited for rent. This is also why the owner of the workshop and the person who operated it could earn very different returns. A dye vat did not cease to exist because a cloth merchant failed to pay a processing bill. It could still be used by another dyer. The building could still be rented. The person most likely to enter a cash crisis was the operator who had to advance materials for every order. Niccolò owned the workshop and also participated in the business. When direct operation became less attractive, he retained the possibility of converting fixed assets into rental income. An ordinary worker who possessed only technical skill and no ownership of buildings or equipment had no such protection. When the workshop was busy, he received wages or piece rate earnings. When the operation contracted, the work disappeared. Dattini stood at the opposite end of the structure. He supplied the capital. Through his wool cloth companies and trading firms, he also controlled raw materials, orders, and sales networks. The dyeing company's profit was only one part of his broader commercial system. Even when one workshop experienced a shortage of cash, Dattini could continue earning from wool trading, cloth sales, currency exchange, and other partnerships. A merchant who controlled the whole chain could transform a shortage in one business into a receivable or payable elsewhere. The person standing beside the dye vat could see only whether the next bag of dye could be purchased. So why did a medieval dye workshop become increasingly short of money as it became busier? Because the service it sold consumed cash before the customer paid for it. Alum and matter had to be purchased first. Firewood had to be burned first. Workers had to work first. A failed color had to be corrected with additional materials and labor. The customer's cloth became more valuable because of the dyeing. The workshop's compensation could remain trapped in the ledger. When orders were limited, revenue was also limited, but the amount of money that had to be advanced remained smaller. When orders increased rapidly, every piece of cloth created both a future payment and a present expense. When customers paid quickly enough, activity created wealth. When payment lagged, activity created only more accounts receivable. A successful dye house operator therefore needed more than a superior knowledge of color. He had to control customer credit. Some customers could be required to supply their own materials. Reliable merchants could receive delayed payment terms. Riskier customers might be required to pay in advance. The workshop needed enough alum and matter to continue operating, but not so much inventory that every coin became trapped in the warehouse. The vats had to be kept busy, but not so overloaded that rushed work created errors and redyeing. Most importantly, the operator had to understand that profit in a ledger and coins inside a cash box were two very different things. When we return to the Prado dye house, the furnace is still burning intensely. Workers pull a length of dark red woolen cloth from the vat. The customer sees the color. The cloth merchant sees a higher selling price. The bookkeeper sees processing revenue. Only the operator knows how much alum, matter, fuel, and cash the cloth has already consumed, and how long it may take before any of those resources truly return to the workshop. On the surface, the medieval dye house sold color. What it really provided was its own money, advanced on behalf of the cloth merchant to pay every cost required before a colored cloth could exist.